Hi everyone. That was a very cool and bright ad, wasn't it? I believe it's time to start for us today. My name is Kate. I'm head of sales at Lemon.io. And today we're gonna speak about the engineering management and the technical leadership. Although I personally lead a non-engineering team, I'm still super excited to hear some ideas and inspiration about how to manage the teams overall. What are the other tools and techniques that other people use? I'll stay here throughout the whole event. We expect to take about 60 minutes today. And I also encourage you to add your questions here in comments. We're gonna read the most interesting questions, and we'll have our speaker answer your questions. Moreover, the most interesting questions are gonna win some prizes from the Lemon.io company. So the better questions, the more questions you ask, the higher chances you have. Our very special event for today is Luca Sartoni. He's an engineering leader. He's been developing technical products for over 2 decades. He's done a lot of products, he's managed teams, and I recently found on LinkedIn that he has also started his initiative to transform engineers into the managers. Super excited about that, and let's welcome Luca Sartoni.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be
For
here.
sure. For sure. Tell us a few words about what we're gonna speak about today.
Sure. So I spent more than 20 years in the tech industry. I started my career as an engineer myself of practice, and then I spent some time working on marketing for a little bit. And then at some point, I had the opportunity to lead a team of engineers, and it was really, really hard. At the very beginning, it was really, really hard. I was not checking the marks. I was not getting anywhere until I started to look into the difference between being an individual contributor as an engineer and being a manager of engineers, or what today we call leaders, right? We try to develop everybody's leadership because we discovered and we know that there are traits that if you're able to develop in people, then they get better at helping their team performing better. So I spent 5 years leading teams, and then I became also director. So I was leading teams and of engineers, still in the tech industry and still producing software. And then at some point, I realized that I was really interested in developing this even further. And so I created my own initiative where I help first-time managers to become managers. Because we have this idea in the tech industry that it's just enough to be a good engineer to be able to lead other engineers. And that is not really the case. Most of the time, we just put people in a position of struggling because they were super excellent engineers that suddenly become managers, and they have lacunas. They don't know how to do a few things, and they don't know why their team is not performing how they expect, so on and so forth. And the reason is being a manager is a craft, is a work, is a job with the same level of complexity of being an engineer. It's just different. And so there are a few things that you need to learn when you transition from individual contribution in the tech into management and upper management later on. And today I will explore a little bit of that and how to actually build and maintain and lead effective teams, high-performing teams in your organization. Let's get started. There are things when you become a manager, so you spend a lot of time writing code, and suddenly someone says, hey, would you like to lead a team? And you just accept the job, or you push because you want to have your own team, or you bootstrap a new project, and until yesterday you were working alone on something, and suddenly you have other people that report to you, and you don't know exactly how things go. So today we're going to look at some of these things. The first thing I want to explore are team dynamics. There are things that happen only when you have other people involved. The first one is hiring. When you are on yourself, you are alone, you're an individual contributor, or you work alone on something, you're not really, you don't have this problem. You're just yourself. So you know perfectly your strengths, you know your weaknesses, you know what you like, you know what you don't like. You know if you like to wake up early in the morning, or if you like to work late at night. You know if you like to work for 4 hours on a single problem, or if you like to work on 3 different problems at the same time. So if you're multitasking with single-threaded mind. But when you start, when you have a team, you have this first initial issue, which is hiring. How do you hire the right people for the position you have to fill? Now, hiring itself has a few things to keep in mind. The first one is that you, as a manager, might have or might not have a say in the people that are assigned to your team. However, if you have any influence on how people are assigned to your team, my recommendation is to get the highest level of diversity you can in your team. What is diversity? Basically, you want to have every single individual in your team to have a different background, to have a different experience, to have a different point of view, to have a different upbringing. Possibly they live in different countries if you work distributedly or remotely. And the more languages as a group you are able to speak, the better it is. And this applies to human languages, so just like tongues, or computer languages. Because I know that maybe your team is working on React, but I tell you, having someone proficient on Python in the team can be helpful at some point. So try to foster that diversity. Try to get as many people from different areas of expertise together within your team. Don't try to hire just people that they look like you, they work like you, and they are interested in the same things you are, because over time, that will be a strong limit in getting your team to be high performing. And once you have different people and a lot of diversity in your team, you need to actively foster something called inclusion. So you need, as a manager, have processes that they deliberately ask everyone to contribute, that deliberately take the best out of everyone, and they make sure that everyone feels safe, included, welcomed, and valued within the team. It's not just enough to have everybody in, you also need to invite them to contribute with their best to the team. And then we have communication. Communication is something that managers know they need, but they don't know how to foster. On this, I have a very, very strong opinion, like in many other things about these topics. But on communication, I have a strong opinion. The best leaders, the best managers are great at communication. It means that they know how to craft narratives, that they resonate with their team, that they resonate with their peers, and that they resonate with their upper management. They're able to take issues and transform those issues into narratives where people align and people get interested and people start to think, how can I solve that problem? Instead of just nagging about something that doesn't work. Great communicators, great managers are able to take a story and make it the story for the team, are able to bring out that value and communicate that value properly. And how they do that? Well, with clarity. This is, if there's one thing you need to remember about communication, is this: be clear. Clear is kind. Unclear is unkind. What does it mean? It means that if you are clear when you set expectations, when you tell something to somebody, when you give them feedback, if you're very clear, very specific, if they understand properly, then you're doing them a favor, and you're doing a favor to yourself. You're helping the message to go across, to be understood, to be remembered, and then to bring into actions. If your communication is not clear enough, people will make assumptions, because every time that we get a message and that message has a gap, our brain fills that gap with our own assumptions. And if your messages are full of gaps, other people will fill those gaps with their assumptions. And over time, all of those assumptions, they will bring everything out of tracks. So make sure that when you communicate, you are extremely, extremely clear. This applies even more in companies that they work asynchronously, distributed, and in languages that are not primary languages to the contributors. So in a company that has a lot of people around the world and they assume English as the enterprise language, so the corporate language, needs to remember that many people do not have English as their primary language in their work. And so they need to refrain, or they need to put a limit to the level of slang, for instance, that is used. Because if you use a lot of American slang in the documentation or in the way that people communicate within the company, people who are not familiar with that slang would not understand. And not necessarily they will ask for clarification. They would just make assumptions. And sometimes those assumptions are wrong and the communication breaks. So make sure that clarity is the number one priority in communication. The other one is this. We hear a lot that managers and leaders, they need to foster empathy. They need to be empathetic, to the point that they need to be empaths. It becomes a noun. You are an empath. The truth is that empathy alone is not enough. And sometimes empathy is problematic, can be a limit to a manager and to a leader. Because empathy is the ability of feeling other people's feelings, to be in other people's shoes. So when someone is suffering, we feel that sufferance on ourselves. And when someone has a problem, we are able to identify us with their problem. Now, the problem with this approach of fostering too much empathy is that when people have a problem and they refer to their manager for support, they want to find someone who is rock solid and provides support, not someone who struggles even more than them because gets too much empathetic with the problem. And so my advice is, yes, keep empathy in mind, make sure that you are familiar with it, but push yourself towards compassion. Try to be a compassionate manager, compassionate leader. Why? Because compassion is the willing to help others, regardless understanding how they feel or feeling how they feel. So we have these three things, like empathy, sympathy, compassion. Empathy, as I said before, is feeling what other people feel. Sympathy is about understanding what other people feel. And compassion is about willingness to help regardless of the first two. A good manager, an excellent leader, is a compassionate person who wants to help others. And when someone shows up in their team or in the stakeholders comes with a problem, they understand how people feel, but even if they don't, they want to help and they provide a solid path of support to that person that it requires help. And then an excellent manager is great at feedback. Hold on a second. What is feedback? Do you know what's feedback? Well, feedback is a term that in engineering, strict engineering, is a signal that goes back into the system somehow. We can have positive feedback, negative feedback. Now, in technical terms, like feedback as an industrial term. Then, after the Industrial Revolution, actually after the 60s, feedback has been introduced as a term in management when we refer to messages that people give to other people in order to change their behaviors. So when someone in my team is doing something that I don't like or that I think should be done differently, I provide them feedback so they can change that behavior. If there is not willingness to change other people's behavior, it's just mere communication. We call it feedback only when there is this intention of changing other people's behavior. What is this bringing to? Well, that feedback is a very technical aspect of communication. It's not just enough to tell somebody, well, that doesn't work. to change their behavior in the way we expect, even though we gave them feedback. And so if we look into our experience, I'm sure that each one of us has multiple experiences where they received what they call poor feedback. So they received an information, they don't know actually what to do with that. Or someone brought to their attention that they are doing something that is not correct, but how do I fix it? How do I bring myself back to performance? So what I recommend managers is this. The first thing to do about feedback is to become excellent at receiving feedback. In order to do that, you need to keep in mind that there is a big barrier inside your head that makes difficult for you to receive feedback. Each one of us has that barrier. And that barrier is incarnated in 3 triggers. There are 3 aspects of the messages that we receive that they make difficult for us to hear, listen, process, understand, and put in actions the message that other people are giving us. The first one is called the it trigger. So when someone tells us something that we disagree profoundly, that triggers us a shutdown. We stop listening. So someone says, "You're always late." And I don't find myself to be late. So I was not late. I stop listening. But that person is wrong. It's clearly giving me a message that is wrong. So why should I keep listening? And our brain does that automatically. It's not something that we do consciously. If someone says, "I don't like your red shirt," well, I have a blue shirt. That is wrong. I don't listen. So how to avoid that? Trying deliberately to listen more. Why is that person telling me that they don't like my red shirt? Are they referring to this one that I'm wearing today, which appears to be blue? Are they referring to the shirt that I was wearing yesterday? Is there anything in the medium? So is there anything broken in my camera that makes this shirt look red? Is there anything broken in their computer that makes it look red? Do they have a different perception of colors that I'm not aware of? So these are the questions we need to ask ourselves when we receive a message that objectively feels wrong because it's just not in line with our personal experience. Then we have the second blocker, the second trigger is the we trigger. And it's about the relationship with the other person. The other person gives us an information, gives a message about us, but the relationship we have with that person for us comes first and derails the conversation. And someone says, "You're always late." And my answer is like, "How dare you tell me that I'm always late, considering that you are always late too?" So now I'm not listening because the relationship I have with this person comes in the way. How to avoid that? Well, as a manager, as a leader, you have to remember that if you want to live a happy life, nothing that happens needs to get personal. When people tell you something, even if they say your name, even if they point a finger to you like this, they're not talking to you, they're talking to your position, they're talking to you as a manager, they're talking to you as their leader. And so the conversation needs to stay outside of the relationship, needs to be not personal. And this will help you to avoid the we trigger. And then we have the third one, which is the most difficult of the 3. So we said we had the it trigger, something is clearly objectively wrong. The we trigger, the relationship gets in the way. And then we have the third one, the most insidious of the 3, the I trigger. Someone tells you, "You're always late." And you don't consider yourself to be a person that is late. And that hits you on your identity. Your identity is put in question. And that at that point you stop listening because you say, "I'm not always late. Yesterday I was not, for instance." And then you start thinking about you as your identity. Well, that person probably meant that recently you were late at a meeting and that created a problem. But because you are mostly focused on your own identity, you stop listening. So remember these 3. It, we, and I are the 3 triggers that stop you from listening to feedback. And then comes the giving feedback. When you provide feedback, you need to provide feedback that is very leverageable from others, that can be actionable and can be used by others to change their behaviors. So how do you do that? Well, you do that being very specific, and you do that telling people what happened, what action they made that created the problem, and what was the impact that had on you. So being very specific in the feedback we give people, avoiding words like always, words like never, those are not useful. Just be specific. Yesterday you were late at the meeting and we had to start late because of you. That is a more specific feedback than, oh, you're always late. And then we get into the third area that a new manager finds some struggle, which is the decision making. Because yesterday I was an individual contributor and my decision making was very limited to my own work. And now, as a manager, my decision making extends to the people who report to me. And also, my decision making extends to the project my team is in charge of. And my decision making has an impact on other people's lives, not just my own contribution. So, the first thing that I recommend managers is to have a clear direction and give clear directions to others. Avoid to be wobbly, avoid to be uncertain. Make sure that your decision process is solid, but once that you make a decision, communicate that decision consistently in a specific direction. Remember that you are accountable for your team. So the quality of a manager is measured by the impact or the results of their team. And this is something that first-time managers find really hard to accept and to embrace because they're not used to it. They're used to be accountable just for their own strict work. And so let's say that you have a team of 5 people and the team does not meet a deadline. An inexperienced manager would go into arguments like, well, we didn't meet the deadline because that person was late on schedule. But a more experienced manager would say, it's my fault. My team was late. That means that I am late. That means that it's my responsibility, and I will take full responsibility for that, and I will make sure to fix the situation because it's my level of accountability that is clearly showing some lack of precision. And then comes one of my favorite traits that I recommend people to develop, which is consistency. Every time that you are consistent, every time that you give messages that they are consistent over time, you will have people aligning with you. Every time that you receive inconsistent requests from stakeholders, from your upper management, from other teams, from team members, every time you receive inconsistent messages, you have to figure out things once again. Sometimes it's the very same question, but asked in a different way that requires you to rework the answer. But if you are consistent in your work and you develop consistency also in the input, then everything becomes more effective. Let me give you an example. When I was working as an engineering manager, I had a team that was also dealing with maintenance of the infrastructure. And we had many stakeholders because our infrastructure was supporting a lot of areas of the experience in our product. And so it was happening that marketing had a need, and they were sending us a Slack message asking if we could change some areas of the user experience. And then we had DevOps. They were pinging us because they wanted to change us the way that we were deploying code in a specific area of the experience. And then we had product that were pinging us, telling us that we had new pricing, and so we had to change prices on the pricing page. And each one of these stakeholders used a different channel. So marketing was sending us a Slack message, another team was sending us an email, and another team was sending us like messages. They were like posting notes on GitHub. And we had to follow different channels, and every channel had a different way to be addressed. And this was exhausting, absolutely exhausting for my team of 5-6 people to follow all these different channels and to have all this inconsistent way of making requests to our maintenance queue. And so what we did, we came up with a work agreement. It's a document, very simple, that says when you want us to address something that is maintenance related, fill this form or provide us all the context and all the information in this specific way. And this is what you can expect from us. We have our SLA for response. We have our this is the person who will do the triage. This is the person who will make sure that this goes through. And so we just negotiate in advance with every single stakeholder our process. We make that process very visible, very consistent, and we just stick to that process. If that process is not good enough, we iterate on the process. So we basically try to remove as many exceptions to that process as possible. And this level of consistency basically brought the team to be very effective in maintenance work. And this then applied to pretty much any other work that required interaction with many different stakeholders. Also, in terms of consistency, this is consistency across. I also encourage managers to have consistency going down. If your organization is familiar with having one-on-ones, and so managers have one-on-ones with their reports, make it consistent. If you are meeting every Monday with that specific person, make sure it happens every Monday at that specific time and never skip. Don't do one-on-ones every now and then. Do it weekly or every second week, but very, very regularly. And then if you are used to do performance reviews, make them a regular activity in your year. You do 3 performance review in a year, 4 if you do by quarter, or 2 if you do every semester. Make it sure it happens very precisely on the calendar. If you have a team meeting, always have the team meeting at the same time, the same day, the same every week or every second week. But being extremely consistent in those rituals makes people more familiar with your process. And so also your team will perform better because they don't have to second guess themselves if this week there is a meeting or not, or did we have a performance review last semester? I don't remember. Maybe it's 2 years old. Being consistent is key. So if you want to let's get to the takeaways for today, and then I open to the Q&A. The first thing to foster as a new manager is diversity and inclusion. Make sure your team are as diverse as possible and be very deliberate in including everyone in the process. Foster clarity. If you have one priority, is clarity. Be clear when you communicate and everything will be easier. And then consistency. Everything needs to become so consistent that people know your rituals by heart and they are accustomed to them and they get results because of that. I'm very happy to answer any question that comes from you. I'm sure there are many, and I'll be happy to answer. Otherwise, Kate, do you have a question for me?
Yes, I do.
Please.
I think I will not be the one who wins a prize from Lemon.io for the questions. So I encourage all our listeners to put their questions to get the answers like real time. I'm sure you'll share your contacts right later. So anyone who has questions after the sessions, they can probably ask. But still,
Yes.
guys, if you have questions right now, you can ask them, because if you have that question, most likely someone else has. So why not to share that experience in the real time? All right, we have the question coming here. Hi, Luca. Thank you for sharing your valuable experience. I do agree. You mentioned both leaders and managers. Could you explain the difference that you see between the two and whether the principles you presented apply to both?
Absolutely. This is an excellent question. Because what happens nowadays is that companies, they advertise positions in their organization mentioning just leaders, and they call people team leads, lead of leads. So they have this idea that leadership is something so relevant that takes over all the job descriptions, which is somehow correct in the sense that leadership is a trait that makes people amplify the investment that a company made in other employees. So a company invests in hiring 5 engineers. If you have a good leader for them, you're amplifying their contribution. Therefore, the investment that the company made in those 5 is paid back earlier and handsomely. if you put someone who is managing them that doesn't have leadership traits, probably the investment will be, so the return of investment will be very limited and not up to the standards that a proficient leader would bring. And for this reason, many tech companies, they just advertise leadership positions, and even starting at engineering management, they call them team leads. The problem with this is that there is no more talking about the difference between a leader and a manager. And there is this idea that being a manager is a limiting, is a position that is very limited or not useful because you want to be a lead, not a manager. Now, the thing is, a manager is crucial, especially at the very beginning of the pyramid. So when you go from individual contribution going up, because if you put someone that considers themselves a leader and not a manager, they will completely avoid some of the very practical tasks that a manager is required to do in order to have a team of engineers or designers to perform properly. So for instance, you need to keep an eye on people's performance. If you are a visionary leader, someone who is very good at inspiring others, very good at setting vision, very good at setting the mission, very good at being inspiring, but you don't spend time evaluating, doing performance review, checking in with the people, doing one-on-ones, because you find those tasks to be boring sometimes, or to be work that you're not happy with, your team will not perform. You will not get things done. So the role of a manager is to get things done, leveraging the expertise of the individual contributors they report to. So they actually are their reports. Now, when you go from individual contribution to leading a team, my recommendation is to develop management skills. When you are solid with the management layer, then on top of that, you start fostering leadership skills, which are more inspiring, they're more inspiring people, they're more setting vision, they're more, they are more abstract in one sense, but only when you have covered all the pragmatic approach to management that a engineering manager should have very solid. So the differences between the two is that management is a very practical approach, and leadership is a little more abstract. Now, a manager with leadership traits is definitely better than a manager without leadership traits, but an engineering manager that only has leadership traits and no management at all will never get anything done.
That was a good answer. Thanks, Luca, for the answer, and Nicola for the question. We have one more question from Gonçalo. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. So the question is, given the diversity in the team, the speed of delivery, results, and quality may vary depending on the skills and the project. So what metrics should we use to review the performance of the engineers?
This is another excellent question. And as many of the excellent questions in the engineering universe, the answer is depends. It depends. I know it's a very underwhelming answer, but this is the truth. It depends. But let me get there. Now, what are the parts that it depends? Well, it depends on your organization, because there are organizations that they measure the performance of a team of an individual contributor by the line of codes that they they commit in a specific amount of time. There are organizations that they measure the proficiency of an engineer by how difficult are the problems that they're able to solve. And there are other organizations that they measure by the results that a team brings at the end of every set amount of time. Now, there are three main buckets that we can discuss on this. One is the input. Sometimes, when you work as an individual contributor, let's say you are consulting, sometimes your performance is defined by the amount of hours that you work. Because if you're paid by the hour, that is the part that you care the most. How many hours did I put into this? What is the billable time? And how much money do I make? So you can measure the input. which is amount of time. Then you can move forward, you can move further and start measuring output of engineers. So engineers, so this engineer produces this amount of code in a specific amount of time. This other engineer brings more valuable code. Then we can discuss if it's better to have more code, less code, more valuable code, better code. That is a completely different story. But we just look at the output, how much they produce, and then we determine how we measure that. And then we use that as a key indicator of their performance. And then there is another step, which is to work on outcomes. The work that this team brought in the last quarter had the outcome of delivering a great product, solving a great problem, fixing issues that were in our backlog for years. Then you look at those elements, those outcomes. And eventually those outcomes that even evolve into product outcomes and say the work of this engineering team brought this product to be profitable or to have this specific amount of sales. Now, depending on the organization you're part of, you can find yourself to be measured in the input, in the output, in the outcome. Independently of what happens in your organization, though, you as a manager are required to evaluate your engineers based on the culture that your company has. But when you're not solid as an engineering manager, you're not very clear about the expectations you have with your individual contributors. And so there are individual contributors that they measure themselves in ways that are different from the ways that your company wants them to be measured. So my recommendation is define those metrics within your organization, talk to your upper leadership, talk to your CTO, talk to your technical leadership, define together with them how your company, your organization expects engineers to be evaluated, and then communicate that way, that framework very clearly to individual contributors. And you as a manager, use that map to constantly do that evaluation. This applies independently on how the metric is defined. Now, I understand that the question is about what is the best metric, and the answer is it depends on the culture of the organization. There is not a single metric that can be applied to every engineering organization.
Luca, thanks for answering Gonzalo's question. We have a couple of more questions here in the chat. One of them is less serious. The guys are asking why your door is blocked.
My door is blocked because I have young kids in the house. And whoever has young kids in the house and is doing a live on YouTube knows that there is only one way to avoid young kids in the frame, which is stacking a heavy object against the door. Next question,
cool.
Please.
The next session will be about how to work remotely, especially when you have kids, and how to do that in a very efficient way. So the next question we have is from Yaman. Guys, sorry if I put the wrong pronunciation. So I feel the ideas that you've listed are not valid for every nationality. I mean, when you have a multinational team, some might understand compassion differently. So how can we be sure compassion will not be misused?
This is a great question. This is a great point, actually. Already we have a misunderstanding, probably, or we have, let's put it this way, we have a different understanding of the term compassion. And I fully align, I really feel you, Yaman, for a reason. In my language, my native language is Italian. And when I directly translate empathy into empatia, sympathy into simpatia, and compassion into compassione, the meaning shifts a little bit. So for instance, sympathy does not translate directly into simpatia. Because in Italian, when you say that someone is simpatico, means they're a funny guy. In English, when you say that someone is sympathetic, means that they really understands other people's feelings. Completely different things. So I fully understand that there are languages where the declination, the translation, and then the localization of the concept of compassion is different. Now, the kind of compassion I'm talking about is the willing of a manager to help the team members and other stakeholders in the organization, regardless of being able to feel their feelings or to understand them. Because what happens if you just work on empathy and sympathy is, with empathy, someone comes to you with a problem and you get overwhelmed by that problem. So they come to you for advice, and what they find is a manager who is even more worried about that thing. So someone comes to you and says, our backlog, the backlog of our issue is growing out of control. We don't know what to do. And you as a manager, instead of saying, well, let's put together a little task force and we tackle the problem, and tomorrow we have a meeting and we fix it and we provide a quick plan, what you do is, oh my God, it's growing out of control. I don't know what to do. And then you just don't provide any guidance. So this is the problem with too much empathy. Then you have sympathy, which is understanding what other people feel. And sometimes you will not understand how other people feels. Sometimes your team members come with a problem that you don't have, that you never had, and you will never have yourself. For instance, I just make an example. I just make it up. I do not have pets. Someone comes and says, look, today I cannot work because my pet is sick and I don't feel about working. I do not have pets. I do not know that feeling, assuming I never had pets and I don't even know what they are, right? But I don't understand why someone can be unable to work today because their pet is sick, right? If I am a compassionate manager, what I do is I analyze the situation and say, well, that person is emotionally impacted by something in their life. And if I ask them to work nevertheless, probably today they don't bring good work on the table. So it's much better if I give them a day off and then I check in with them tomorrow. And then I see if this is just a one-off, so it can be just personal time off, or is a pattern. So there are people, if this person has a sick pet every week, then it starts to become a problem. But if it happens once, it's not. And so this more rational approach to the situation is the level of compassion that I invite people to evaluate, rather than just being overwhelmed by other people's feelings and not being rational in finding solutions. I hope I answered for Yaman. Eventually I didn't, or I was not precise enough. Please follow up with a question. I would be happy to keep talking about it eventually.
Thanks for answering Yaman's question. We have another question from Nicola, who wants, first of all, to thank you for the previous answer. And the other question is, do you believe anyone can learn to become a good manager or perhaps a leader, or are there initiate skills required?
Personally, as a trainer, in the past, I was training public speaking. Now I train leadership. I train people in many areas. My true belief is that talent does not exist, and so innate. So it's not. I would never say that you cannot do something because you do not have the innate skill. Every skill that a person can do can be transferred and learned by someone else. To a various degrees of proficiency, I understand that. So I'm not saying that tomorrow I start running and in 3 weeks I run a marathon, or that someone starts running and becomes a pro athlete in 5 years just because they run a lot. That is not the case. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is there is a specific standard, and usually the standard is pretty high. It's like pretty high, where everyone, if they put enough work into it and enough interest into it, they can get to. And this applies definitely to management and leadership. Now, when I was helping my individual contributors to become the next managers, so becoming managers in a few months, I was always going through a 3-step system to make sure that the experience was good for everybody. And the 3 steps are interest. The question to ask to an individual contributor, the first question is, are you interested in leading other humans? If the answer is no, I'm not, you should accept that lack of interest and move on. Find a different way for that person to grow in their career, but don't force them to become leads or managers if they are not interested. Because if someone do not have a very genuine interest in leading other humans, the experience will be miserable for them and very, very miserable for the other humans. That's step one. Step two, do you like managing other people? That can only be asked after they tried a little bit. So usually what I did, I was finding test projects where this individual contributor could act as a manager for a few weeks and see how they liked it. So after a few weeks, you ask again the question, which is, are you still interested in managing people? And do you still like managing people after they tried? So interest and then pleasure in doing it. If they're still there, that comes level three, step three. Step three is performance. Now, the first two depends on the other person, on the person who will become a manager eventually. But the third one is a responsibility of the organization. You cannot expect people to become good managers if you don't provide training, education, and resources and support for them to transition from individual contribution in the tech into management in the tech, and then provide the platform to develop their leadership skills.
Beautiful. I love our audience for how many questions they put in the comments. They don't give me a chance to win a prize. So we have at least 2 more questions from Pepe and Sandra. Let's start with the first one. Hi, Luca. How would you work towards consistency if upper management steps in to change the team workflow agreements or technical decisions?
That is a very good question. It happens all the times. This industry does not like standards. Think about how many keyboard layouts we have in this industry, even within the same alphabets, right? So we create standards and then we create more standards and we never agree on anything. Nevertheless, on work agreements within the same organization. So I totally know what you're talking about. You set a work agreement with a stakeholder, and then the stakeholder uses their positional power to override that agreement. Well, my answer is develop your management and leadership skills in order to be more influential with that stakeholder. So let's say that you have a boss, your manager, I don't like to call it a boss. Your manager steps in and changes your workflow. Invite them deliberately in a working session to contribute to their workflow in first place. Because probably what happened is that the workflow was defined in their absence. And then when they came in and they asked for a change, they did not have the whole context to make a deliberate decision that is in line with the decision was already made. That is the step number one. Step number two, here we start to get tactical and a little, step number two, make those overrides expensive for the other part. Every time that your manager comes in and steps over your workflow agreement, so there is clearly override, make that override a little expensive and say, look, yes, we can do a different way, but please, out of these 3 things that we are almost ready to launch, which 2 you want to kill because we do not have time to do them in order to agree with the new workflow? So that change becomes expensive for them, and over time they learn they should not do it. If they want to keep timelines steady and and the outcomes steady, they need to agree with your flows. And then there is the third one, which is the most difficult. Learn to make compromises. Sometimes it's okay if someone who has positional power uses that as positional power to override someone else's decision. You need to put some padding and some flexibility in your work. I know that for engineers and designers, this can be difficult at the very beginning of their career of first-time managers because they're used to a job that is extremely analytical. You analyze a problem, you find the best solution for that problem, and you solve that problem through code. And that code, if it's well done, it's a statement on how to solve the problem. There is no work around it. Okay, yeah, you can refactor, whatever, but you have code that solves the problem. But with people, there is no code for people. There is only communication, relationships, commitments, broken commitments, fulfilled commitments, and relationships are just, something that is always moves. So if someone comes and overrides, build some padding within your timelines so you can adjust to those requests, even if sometimes you do not understand them and makes them you really, really furious. Learn how to deal with that.
Love the answer. Pepe, I also believe that you love this answer. If not, you can still ask something additional here in comments or later after this session.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a question from Sandro. Considering a team of about 8 skilled and performing people, what is the correct way to start scaling the management leadership duties proportionally to the team growing? Good question.
First step, delegate, 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 delegate everything. When you get to 8, so in my experience in software, 8 is the turning point. When you go above 8, you start planning for splitting the team. I know this is very related to the kind of organization I work with. So might be that there are organizations where you can put 20 engineers on the same team and everything works fine. I'm not talking about that. In software, 8 is already a big number. So in my experience, when you get to 8, you need to start thinking, how can we split this into 2 separate teams? However, doing so, in the best case, you need 2 managers, because 1 for each team. Don't make the mistake of splitting in 2 teams with 1 manager for both. It's not going to work. 2 managers. Now, how do you get there? And the question is very interesting. What is the correct way to start scaling? First, as I said, delegate. Start identifying people within the group that they are interested, and eventually over time find pleasure in taking more responsibilities towards people management. So you start, for instance, having someone else running the weekly team meeting, having someone else publishing, if your company does this way, publishing your status updates, have someone else representing the team externally, and start rotating those people under these different new responsibilities to see if they're interested and if they like it. Once that you find someone who is interested and keeps liking it, keep adding responsibilities until comes the day that you and your upper management decide that you want to split the team, or you want to spin off a team, or you want to scale. And at that point, you already have someone who is in the right attitude to take on the step 3 that I mentioned before, which is performance. And then push on your organization to provide support, professional support, coaching, training, anything that allows them to grow their management skills, looking towards leadership skills.
Great. Thank you, Lucas. Thank you, Sandro, for bringing this topic. We have about 4 more minutes to go. We're about to choose the question we like the most. And maybe before that, I can ask my question. I will not win, I know, but still. I wanted to really support you about the team diversity. I believe that if managed properly, it can really be valuable for everyone on the team to learn from each other, and to do that really fast. If not managed properly, it can be a disaster, yes, but I really feel that that's a great source of knowledge, experience, and everything. So if possible, I would encourage everyone to definitely do that. But I also wanted to go back to the hiring. Is there any question that helps you pretty often on the interviews with the candidates that might be about their hard skills or soft skills, but something you ask almost everyone?
Almost everyone in the hiring? Yes. So if I'm hiring for management, the first thing I ask if they ever organized a party with more than 20 people in their life. Because the skill set that you need in order to accommodate 20 people's requests for a party, for a social event, are very similar to the skills that you need when you need to manage a team of people. So that is a question for management. For individual contributors, I highly recommend to have, so because you mentioned hiring and diversity, this is very important to me. Hiring is a complete job, like it's a job per se. And what we know after many years in this industry is that there is a very strong set of biases that we have during the hiring process, and there are representations within our communities that are completely misrepresented within the tech community, just because the hiring processes are not fair and they're not done properly. I would even avoid the word fair; they're just not done properly. So what happens is that sometimes when you address an organization, you say, hey, have you noticed that pretty much everyone in your teams, they look the same, they come from the same place, they have the same gender, like, and usually, it's the tech industry, there's no need to hide this. You look at the team and it's like 95% men, and you say, why? And the answer usually is, well, because we do not have women applying, right? And that sounds like a reasonable answer. It happens with conferences. They say, oh, yeah, we do not have women speaking, but they never applied to speak in the first place. The thing is, look inside your organization, but look at your organization from outside. If all the pictures in your website are just men, how do you expect women to apply? If all the people in your organization are white skinned, how do you expect other people that do not have a white skin to apply? So the diversity that you have is something that you need to foster with active representation of the diversity you want to achieve, rather than just limiting your answers to, well, this is what we get, because what you get is highly impacted by how you behave. And so, yeah, this is my position on this topic. I can
Great
go on
insight
for
about. Oh yeah, I do believe that was very nice about driving this diversity and show it. That was very insightful. Cool. Do you want to choose the question you love the most?
Yes, I have one. The one that was asking
Which one?
the difference between management and leadership.
Let me see. Do you guys remember? Was it Nicola?
Nicola,
The
yes.
difference, or Gonzalo? No.
Yes, this one. I think
Yeah.
this one is a
Good.
very fit question.
Loud. Nicola, thanks for both questions, and especially for this one. I would love to ask you to email the guys at events@lemon.io. I hope they add the email address here in comments. But just email them to do the logistics, okay? Cool. For everyone else, I appreciate, first of all, you, Luca, for making this session, guys from Lemon.io, to organizing all of this, for everyone, just for asking your questions and staying here. We have all the contacts, Luca's contacts here. We have the links for the future events, so apply for any of those you find interesting.
And I would like to thank you for having me, and everybody for spending an hour and a half with us. It was awesome. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for everything.
Yeah, that was great. Have a good one then.